I would rather have 10 police cars than one soup kitchen, if you give me the choice. But sometimes I think that we need to be smarter about what those police officers are actually out there doing.
Back in 1971, Richard Nixon described illegal narcotics as America's public enemy #1 and declared a war on drugs that has since resulted in over 45 million arrests. Eugene Jarecki's exhaustive documentary probes at the roots and consequences of the nation's policy on drugs, talking to dealers, cops and prison officers, and spotlighting a 40-year conflict that shows few signs of reaching a truce.
You know, nobody can afford to be the first guy to say, wait a minute, we can't afford what we're doing, let's do something different. Because if you even made a noise like you were going to be soft on crime in any way, you would be out of a job.
You will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
Catherine, this is almost like everything you always want to know about the drugs wars but were afraid to ask, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly functions admirably as a tome. And does a bit more too. I mean, it's really a good film and you know, moving and all that. I did find the sort of contemporary stuff quite mawkish. There's quite a heavy synth soundtrack. I found that all a little bit familiar. I thought the history of drugs bits were you know, the whole trade was much more interesting and really told me stuff I hadn't seen before. But a lot of it did feel surprisingly familiar. I mean, you were talking about how End of Watch felt for you two, sort of same old, same old. At first glance, this can feel a bit trodden.
Peter, it's a mix of, I guess, the microcosm and the macrocosm, isn't it? That Jarecki does personalise it because it's about his family's housekeeper and her children.
Yeah, it comes from a classic piece of white liberal guilt. He interviews a woman called Nanny Jeter, who happened to be the nanny for their family. And it turns out that their family paid her, doubled her salary to move with them away from town when his parents, prosperous academics, had to move to another city, I think New Haven. And she left behind her children and her son fell into drugs. So he comes from a kind of classic position of white guilt. But I found this movie gripping. I've never heard the case against the war on drugs made from the libertarian left point of view, made so compellingly, really. And he says, well, look, this is a massively wasteful public works program. One of his big interviewees is David Simon, who, of course, the Baltimore journalist and, of course, the author of The Wire, who is kind of brilliant. He's incandescent with rage and contempt.
He describes the drugs war as a Holocaust in slow motion.
It is the sort of, well, yeah, I mean, all those things, I would have thought, that's too much, surely. But by the end of this movie, you're thinking, yeah, this is a class war against what Tom Wolfe called the chow, the poor blacks and whites who are fed like mincemeat through the system, and they're there to create work for the kind of white-collar professional classes of the state. And this movie really does make a very compelling case for that.
So, Catherine, you might have had issues with some of its handling, but it's an important film, surely.
It is an important film, and it's one of those films that stands, and you think this couldn't quite be an article, this couldn't quite be a book, this is the right format for this film, and it is a very admirable work. I'm just worried that people might be sort of initially dissuaded because, you know, in its sort of visual look, it does look like a lot of things you'd see when you're channel surfing.
Far from the front lines of the war, I discovered a vast and less visible world of people who in their own ways play a part.
This chair, in comparison to other types of restraint chairs, is the most humane. The person in the chair can breathe very easily, and it's not restrictive.
The war on drugs has to be a war at every level. It has to be a war on the streets of the cities. It has to be a war at the state level, and it has to be a war at the federal level. It's just like fighting the war on terrorism.
Before, in the prisons, I guess the only choice was you could get a Torah or a Bible. Things have changed now. Anybody want their free copy of the Quran?